So how's it going, guys? Today on the YouTube channel, we're going to be talking about the Phantom with Ohm Roy, a Instagram profiler who is, I would say, one of the best Phantom Instagram pages in the world. Like every single time on daily, I look at his Instagram page, or I look at something else, or I'm just scrolling through my feed, I will see one of his posts and it will literally say something to do with something art wise. So let's catch up on the show. Let's get this show on the road. And topic one is a story done in 1958 to 1959, A Tale of Goodmark. The artist's topic is Wilson McCoy. Wilson McCoy, as everyone knows, is an American comic book illustrator who started working on the Phantom in 1941. In that year, he filled in for Ray Moore, who, as a lot of fans know and should know, Ray Moore is, I would say, first Phantom artist to work on the Phantom daily strip. And the artwork for it is like a film noir sort of type of thing. That's just my impression on his artworks. I would say one of the best artists in the world of his time, and who he fought in World War II. And when he came back, he focused on the Sunday page. Wilson McCoy was finally credited as the artist for the Phantom in the 1946 story, The Queen Astra of Tron-de-Lay. Ray Moore continued his work on the Sunday page until his retirement from the script in 1947. His fellow friend and collaborator, Wilson McCoy, continued to work on the script until he fell ill and unfortunately passed away in 1961. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking about these stories, and now I will be handing it over to our guest.
Thank you, Bradley. I'm very happy to be part of your show, and we've been trying to set this up for a very long time, and finally we made it, right? Yeah. So here we are talking about the Phantom on your podcast. So we'll be talking about Wilson McCoy because I'm a big fan of his art and the stories. So, so we'll be talking about a specific story called The Tale of the Goodmark from 1958 and 59. But to begin with, a
couple of days ago, I actually, before this interview was actually going to happen, I read this story and got it muddled up with the 1958 to 59 story. So yeah,
I completely understand, because in Australia, I think it was called Conley's Goodmark, perhaps. So it was a different name than the original Lee Falk title. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Wilson McCoy's artwork a bit. So he was a very different kind of artist, meaning he was not an illustrator like Ray Moore, but he came from the world of commercial art and advertising, so which had a very different approach to drawing and doing illustrations. So they would technically make the art with the view of attracting and making the most amount of, the biggest impact on people, in fact. And so the approach was very technical and was very different than the illustrative artist. So for example, McCoy's artwork is so impactful, I think, because he used to take pictures of his friends and family, and also he took pictures during his travels, but he didn't copy the pictures as they were, in fact, in his comic panels. But he had to reduce and to minimize those realistic photos to something very cartoony and something slightly caricatural, let's say.
Yeah.
So this is a process which is called hyper realistic art. So
which I when I was actually obviously on Monday, I only had one day to do the script, and so when I was actually researching when I was actually researching for what Wilson McCoy did in his lifetime, and when he was a artist for the Phantom in 1940s, 50s, and until he passed away in 1961, and then obviously the legendary Seymour Barrie, which we will be talking about later in the show, obviously came and did his 30 runs on the 30 years on the comic strip. I was actually, when I was researching this project for the script, I read about Wilson McCoy and his travels over different parts of, I think, Africa, and he got to know different tribes that were in certain parts of Africa, and I found that interesting because if obviously with his work, he obviously, as you said, he used a lot of references, and I found that interesting when I was actually researching this stuff, that he when on his travels, he incorporated the stuff that he had learned on his travels and put that into his art in a more simple way so people could understand what he was conveying.
That's exactly correct. And so the process of minimizing the realistic pictures into something very cartoony adapted to a comic strip is a very difficult process, basically. So he had to minimize and delete and reduce a lot of details in the background to just have the bare essentials to make the most impact on the readers, in fact. Yeah. And it's a very complicated process. So I admire the way he did it, of course. And then I'd also like to add that at that point of time, Lee Falk was probably at the peak of his theater career, meaning he was producing plays.
Obviously, he had 2 comic strips, which was Mandrake the Magician and obviously the Phantom. Phantom first being published, I think, in the dailies dailies in 1936. By when Wilson McCoy came onto the scene, which, as I said, was 1941, that would have been 5 years since that script would have been out, and I think 2 or 3 years since the Sunday script would have been out.
That's right. So Falk was probably at the height of his, let's say, the theater and the drama career. And so the stories written by Falk during the time of Wilson McCoy were like theater and like plays. So you see a lot of dialogues and you see very complex emotions and exchanges which are quite witty and humoristic and so on. So I like that period.
Like in the Phantom war stories, like the Phantom goes to war stories, sort of, in some way.
That's right, yeah. Exactly, yeah. And then we have this story that we're going to talk about, which is called The Tale of the Good Mark. Now, the good mark is a mark which is quite intriguing, and it's mysterious. We don't know where it comes from. So I read a few days back in a magazine which was published by the Freemasons that the symbol comes from ancient Greek letters. Oh, so it's called key and row. In fact, so those are 2 letters which were superimposed, and perhaps this was the source and origin of the good mark. So I was quite intrigued by
interesting to know that. I hadn't heard of that before.
That's right. And so I was trying to do some research, and I found that the mark was, it probably existed in ancient Egypt and then in ancient Greece, and were then used by the first Christians and all. So And so this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this particular story, right? So the good mark. And then we have, let's say, there's a lot of drama going on in this particular continuity. So there was one particular panel that I wanted to talk about where the young Conley is exchanging with the nanny, where he shows the good mark, and
I briefly, when you sent me the pictures of the colored script, I got that I understood fairly quickly what the story was about. But yeah, and I guess when we've seen with other stories, I guess when we say with other stories where we have international travelers who have, I don't know, came from the USA or European countries and are coming into what is known as not unexplored jungle, they're obviously either going to run into trouble and the Phantom has to save them, or the Phantom runs into trouble, and if that certain person that's in the jungle that is wanting the Phantom's help may need to save him if he's a doctor or a veterinary, like we saw in one of the recent daily strips by Mike Manley and Tony DePaul.
Right, and it would certainly help if the person had a good mark somewhere, in fact, imprinted on the skin, because the Phantom would definitely come and help the person then.
Yeah.
Right. If he ever got into trouble.
Jungle drums.
Exactly correct. So, so this panel I was talking about here, Conley was showing the good mark to the nanny, and there's this little exchange and dialogue. So here, it's an example of Lee Falk's way of writing dialogues and his theatrical skills, I'd say. So he says, so Conley says that, well, what's this good mark all about? That he says that it will bring good luck. So the person, so Conley is asking a question and giving the answer at the same time, right? And the nanny replies that, well, he's so rich that he can afford his eccentricities, so you can go and humor him. So you see, this kind of dialogue they do not exist, I think, in the later days, 60s and 70s, where things get a bit more linear and it's more black and white. Right?
In the 60s, when Seymour Barrie took over, I think it got a bit more serious and more towards modern day issues in that time.
Yeah, so very different, and Phantom became an action superhero kind of person, right?
Like with the famous character that obviously Seymour Barrie had drawn and has done quite a few many stories with it, which is General Bababoo, which is obviously the dictator.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So there was the second panel where you can see an example of Wilson McCoy art, where Conley is standing in front of the tombstone. And McCoy was very good with focused lightings.
Yeah.
So you can see that he is standing in front of a tree, and the tree casts a shadow on the two people in front of the tombstone. So this is how he plays with light and darkness. In fact, in many of his panels you can find. And so this is another aspect of Wilson McCoy art, which I wanted to bring up and I thought was very interesting. And so, yeah, so that was some of the reasons why I like the story and of A Tale of the Good Mark. And here you can see an original Sunday page, in fact, which I have on my wall, which I like very much. You know, so this is the point.
But I find it interesting when you do like a sequence thing where you have one photo that you've shown in one post, and then you've had the next one and the next one, and there's like a bit of history and nostalgia going on there for the people who obviously may have already read it, or they've had good experiences with it or something like that.
Exactly. So the idea behind breaking up the original strip into 3 different posts is that you get to see the details of
Yeah.
the line art on the panels, because very often when they were reprinted in newspapers and magazines or comic strips or comic books, sorry, they were compressed.
Yeah.
So the line art were like squeezed and you don't get to see them very well. So I try to do the best so that my community on Facebook gets a good view of the panels.
I think this is a prime example of it.
Exactly, yeah.
I'll be showing the
That's
image
right.
up on the screen right now for the viewers.
Correct. So yeah, so that was the tale of the good mark and Wilson McCoy's art, of course, which was absolutely great. Have you noticed that a lot of new artists, contemporary artists like Dick Frizzell and Peter Kingston, and someone from Sweden called Jan Hafstrom, they kind of were highly inspired by McCoy's art, and they have transformed his art into something more contemporary and pop. And they have produced a lot of artwork, you know, from panels of Wilson McCoy.
Yeah, because I myself, I love when I get to read the Swedish stories. Like, I know I've said this on the channel before, and I've said it during me commenting on Facebook posts, but I quite enjoy reading the Swedish stories. And like you said, most of, like, I guess you can take that into another realm, and use some Swedish stories, say like the Ibis mystery. In the 1990s, we obviously had few publications being published in it for the first time. You had the the Swedish cover when they published it, I think, a couple of years ago, and then in the 1990s, you had Antonio Lemos's cover, which is the first one with the, I'll be putting an image up on screen, but the first one, it's basically nearly a mirror image, basically a reference cover to the original one. So yeah, it's interesting how modern artists have actually in some way taken references and put that into their own work, and put that into their own inspired artwork for, say, a cover or something else, or commission.
Exactly right. So you got it right there.
So the characters involved in the story, I'm pretty sure, are the Phantom, Devil, and...
Well, we have Conley, of course.
Yeah, Conley, and some other characters. Now, the locations obviously is Bengali, and some of the questions I have for you, Olam, is question number 1 is, what is your favorite aspect of the stories that Wilson McCoy worked?
Yeah, so like I said, it was the artwork, the light and the darkness, the focus lightings, then the dialogues, the complex emotions and the emotions that were conveyed by the storytelling at that time. And yeah, and most importantly, I think now that I collect a lot of Wilson McCoy art, they look fantastic on the walls when you put them up. You know,
nearly any original art. Like, I've got, not with me up in my room, but I've got a original Jason Paulo's ink sketch, and which I did the interview with him on the channel. If anyone or the viewers would like to go check that out. He actually, after probably a couple of weeks after doing that interview with him and getting that published on my channel, he sent me a Phantom Crusader picture, which was awesome. And I think last year I got it framed, so it looks, anything that is original and is from obviously the fan, like the artist's mind is pretty cool to have, because it's like looking at someone. It's like looking into someone's eyes and looking into their mind on what they're going to put on paper.
Exactly. And so when you have an original piece of art from a story that you like on your walls, I guess, you know, as a fan and a reader, you absolutely, happy and you enjoy your fandom.
Question number 2 is, if you had to choose your top stories from each decade that Wilson McCoy worked on, what would they be and why?
Right. So I guess from the 1950s, there was a story called The Haunted Castle, which was
Oh yeah, I've read that. I think I've
code.
read that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm
Which was
pretty sure.
co-drawn. Yeah. So that was, I think, co-drawn between Ray Moore and Wilson McCoy.
Yeah.
And it's like a fairy tale where Diana gets kidnapped by this kind of odd character who lives in a castle on the hills called Mugu, and he transforms the kidnapped people into wax dolls, in fact.
Yeah.
Puts them in his garden. So it was,
I think that story, that story was published a couple of years ago in the Phantom World special that used to come out every 4 months by a few publications. But that story the artwork had been done by Ramando Felming, and who is one of my favorites of all time. And yeah, I would just like to say that.
Yeah, so the story continues to inspire the new creators.
You know? Yeah, like
and right. So that was, it has a fairy tale quality to the story where Phantom kind of investigates and he goes to this kind of dreamy, misty mountain, highland castle, haunted castle, and he kind of rescues Diana from her captivity, in fact, and kind of get rid of Mugu and his evil plans. So that was one of the stories I liked from the 1950s. Sorry, that was was it 50s or was it in the 40s?
I'm pretty sure it was somewhere in there because yeah, I'm not.
I think it was the 40s. Yeah.
Yeah, because
yeah,
I'm not too sure myself, because when I've read the story, I've obviously read the modern day type of story with Ramando Felming, but I may or not have already or not have read the original. You never know. I've been collecting for this year 6 years, so most of the stuff, if I've read it, I've probably forgot about it.
Right. And then from the 1950s, I think there's a story called The Mob. I don't know if you recall the story, which talks about a gang that collects money from different sources, like a mafia. And so it touches upon the themes of alcohol prohibition in the United States. So we have Diana's uncle, Dave. He goes to some liquor store and gets it shut down because they were making trouble in the neighborhood.
Okay.
And then Dave gets kidnapped, and Phantom has to dismantle the gang, and ultimately, in the end, he gets the kingpin called Rudy the Collector.
Yeah.
So you have
that's usually in the first bit, like when the Phantom was actually coming out, and obviously he was getting into stories. That's most of the stories anyway. That's like most of it's either him saving someone, stopping someone, or stopping something from coming into the jungle, or him stopping some evil plan to take over the world or something. It's something along those lines.
That's right. And so here you have two kind of themes that Lee Falk touches upon. One is the alcohol and the Prohibition era, and the second one is the gang wars, and you know, it reminds us of Al Capone and the mafia in the United States. So it was a great story, and the artwork was inspired by a type of film called the film noir, you know, where you have very focused lighting on the characters and on items in a panel, which kind of amplifies certain emotions, and also it's a very interesting daily, I'd say. So and then
that movie, is that done in black and white?
That's right. In fact, those movies from the 1940s, they were
film black and white. Yes, black and white for me. Sorry to take you on this downward spiral, but black and white to me, I've always liked black and white, and even in photos, I've always liked black and white.
Yeah, and then of course from the 1950s, the stories got a bit tighter, and McCoy had, like you said, he had traveled to north of Africa, to Morocco, Libya, Egypt, and those countries. So you see a lot of those Oriental highland princes and the castles, because he had taken photographs of the architecture. So you find those in the panels, and that is another interesting era for the artwork and the storytelling. And so you have fantastic stories like the Crescent Cult, the 50th Wife, and the Werewolf, and so on, which leads us to the next topic of our discussion today, which is the slave market of Mucar.
Yep. So the next topic, as Ohm said, we are now going to be moving into the slave market of Mucar. Obviously, the story was done in 1961, and the artist is Barrie or Seymour Barrie. And I always get his first name wrong. That's why I call him Seymour. But anyways, Seymour Barrie was an American artist and a comic book illustrator who he is not usually talked about. Name is obviously Seymour Barrie. So he first started working on the Phantom in 1961, with his first story being the one that we're going to be talking about, which is the slave market of Mucar. As a lot of fans know, Seymour Barrie continued working on the Phantom for 3 decades until he handed the roles over to fellow Phantom artists Keith Williams and George Olsen. The story in 1972, the slave market of Mucar was then made in 1972 into a novel by Basil Copper. Now I've just put this thing in where I'm going to be asking you an extra question. Now this extra question is obviously not in the script, but I would like to ask you, how is France? How is France? I've never been to France, but one of the most interesting things I've seen and I've always wanted to go to is the Notre Dame, which obviously half was on the news a couple of years ago. But how is France? How is it?
Well, it's a very beautiful country, of course, and it's well known for its lifestyle. And so we have a lot of arts and cinema, historical monuments and museums. And the place where I live in Paris is I am very close to some of the world's biggest museums. So I have access to a lot of paintings from different artists, you know, the old masters and contemporary artists and all. So I hope you'll be able to visit the city one day and come and enjoy what France has to offer in terms of culture and lifestyle and food and so on. And Notre Dame, you know, it's a church, it's a cathedral, sorry, which dates from the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know that
there was survived 2 world wars.
That's right. And it was also featured in Phantom stories.
Yeah, I think I've heard about that story as Klaus Roy Murphy. Was it?
Well, I
Or
think
was
it
another
was
one?
well, it was drawn by Jean-Yves Mitton. It's one of the French artists.
Oh,
you know?
right. Okay.
And so we have the Notre Dame. The second monument after Notre Dame in Paris is a prison called the Bastille prison. Right. And there was a phantom story written by Team Phantoman where Phantom rescues prisoners from that place. And so it's quite an interesting story where he fights alongside the revolutionaries and and also the royalties. And so you might want to catch up on that story one day.
So the story elements of this story obviously have I would say most stories have this element one way or another. So we have the slave market of Mucar. We have, obviously, I would say the modern term for that would be people smuggling. I would say that. I would just going to say that. The characters in the story is the Phantom, Devil, Tribe people, and the people that live in Mucar. Now, the locations are obviously Skull Cave, Mucar, Bengali, the Jungle Patrol, and etc. Now, would you like to talk about this story and yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I chose this story, which is because you have an adventure and you have an investigation that goes on about people disappearing from a prison and then smuggled and trafficked into a slave city and then resold to other buyers. And France is not that far from Africa, geographically speaking. And from time to time, we know that such events actually happen, in fact, in history, and even sometimes in the recent past. So as far as I hear, because there's a lot of war, and Africa is quite a complicated continent.
Yeah,
right.
It has all those countries.
Exactly. So Phantom, here we see that he is wearing local costume, which I find quite intriguing, which is because this time, in the heart of the action, he's wearing the Arab dresses,
garbs.
and exactly. And he, did you know that story coincides with the release of the film called Lawrence of Arabia?
Oh,
so it's a very famous film. It was actually released in the same year and in the same month as Slave Market of Mucar. And they're very.
Do you think that would have inspired that story, or because it would have been so big back in those days, do you think that it would have inspired that story in any way?
Well, I think so, because Lee Falk was a man of his times, and he was, he picked up themes and subjects that were contemporary from that period. And since it was a big...
He was also a first in many things.
Exactly right. And when Phantom rides a horse, dressed as an Arabian in the desert, the panel which I sent to you.
Yeah.
And
which will
goes right. So I think that's one of the best panels that I've seen in the story. And so then he enters the city and the citadel in the desert. And so it's quite a fantastic adventure, I think. It was very well drawn as well by Seymour Barrie.
So the first question I'm going to ask you is, why do you think fans all around the world love his art so much and still do?
Right. So there was a transition between Wilson McCoy, which was theatrical with a lot of drama, and which resemble plays to something which was more cinematographic. So you could see like an action superhero who, there's a lot of action and it's like a movie, right?
Yeah.
So this was the big change, in fact, in the art and the storytelling. So it becomes more action oriented and closer to the Marvel and DC storylines, perhaps.
Yeah.
Right.
So question number 2.
So this was a big change here. Yeah.
Were you going to say any more about that question?
Right, and then and then I'd say that Barrie. Yeah, sure. So I'd say the stories were more family oriented and more accessible to a lot of people because the storylines got simpler and easier to follow, right?
Yeah.
Later on, so we had a set of villains, and there were a lot of action sequences and so on. So that accounts for the popularity of the Phantom all over the world.
Yeah. So question number 2 is, what are your top stories that Barrie has worked on?
So, of course, as we spoke about earlier, it's the slave market of Mucar. And then there's another one, which is related to France to a certain extent, which is, I think it's called the Vault of Missing Men.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And it speaks about a French pirate called Jean Lafitte, who was based in America and was a kind of a corsair, perhaps. And he worked in the area of the Bay of Mexico. So this was a story where Lee Falk introduced the sister of Jean Lafitte, but historically, don't think he had a sister called Jeannette. And Phantom quotes the girl and gets married later on. And historically, Jean Lafitte and his biography is a bit mysterious. We don't have a lot of information about what happened to the pirate, in fact, in the end. But Lee Falk very astutely puts him in the vault in the skull cave, right? So that was quite a clever plan, right?
Yeah, I would say that's clever planned. Question number 3 is, when you were growing up, what did you like about the Phantom and why are you still collecting?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, Phantom was already there in my household because the comic strip were read by my parents and my uncle. So I was introduced to the Phantom at a very early age, in fact. And today, if I still collect the superhero, which is because, well, it's first of all, it could be nostalgia, of course. Nostalgia has a big role to play in collecting. And then I looked at the artwork with a new eye. And by that time, I had learned a bit more about fine arts and illustrations and so on. So then I realized the interest and the importance of the artwork by Wilson McCoy, or let's say the early illustrative art like Ray Moore and so on. And then that got me collecting once again. So I guess that's how I got back to the Phantom, which was about 10 years back, right?
It's funny how when say if a collector has spent some time away from the character and then they discover it later in life, it's funny how the character can make a lasting impression on you, and later in life it can draw you back in just like that.
Yeah, and that things you do when you were a child gets imprinted in your mind for the rest of your life, so it comes back after a certain age, right?
So thank you for joining me on this awesome chat about these stories. And if you would like to support our channel, and if you would like to support Ohm Roy's blog, where could they go?
Well, I have my Instagram page, so you could always follow my Instagram page, which is instagram.com roy.ohm. then we have the Wikipedia, general Wikipedia page on Wilson McCoy. You can go and read the biography and the information that I have been writing on the artist. And then I have a blog on Ray Moore, so which is wordpress.com, Ray Moore. And then I have another one, an interesting blog that curates and aggregates information from different sources on the Phantom War Shields. So that's wordpress.com, Phantom War Shields, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting how we can have interesting people on the show. And if, like I said, if you would like to support the PhantomCave Reviews YouTube show, you can do so by subscribing and comment on what other stories you would like me to talk about next time with our special guest. And as always, keep PhantomCaving, and we'll be back next time on the YouTube channel.
Thanks a lot, Bradley.